I thought working the night shift at a lonely 7-Eleven gas stop on Colorado Highway would be easy money. But then I found a strange set of rules taped behind the counter. Rules that made no sense. Rules that no human could have written. The first night I broke one, I realized they weren't warnings. They were survival instructions. And if I didn't follow them, I wasn't just risking my job, I was risking my life. Watch now if you dare. Welcome to Dr. Snooze, where every story keeps you awake at night. Your support means the world, so don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Together, we're building a family of horror lovers who aren't afraid of the dark. Are you ready for tonight's tale? When I first took the job at the 7-Eleven gas stop along Colorado Highway, I thought it would be just another night shift. I needed the extra cash, and the idea of sitting behind a counter, brewing coffee, and selling snacks to truckers didn't sound so bad. The place wasn't busy, at least not compared to the daytime hours. Nights were supposed to be quiet, lonely maybe, but manageable. That's what I told myself when I signed the contract. But I should have read the paper more carefully. The manager, a man named Carl, handed me a thin, yellowed manual on my first day. It wasn't the usual employee guide. No rules about dress code or customer service. Instead, it was filled with things that didn't make sense. Rules written in short, almost frantic sentences. Keep the front door locked after 12:13 a.m. No exceptions. If a man in a gray hat asks for cigarettes, do not look him in the eye. Pretend not to hear him. Always keep the coffee pot half full, even if nobody drinks it. If you hear knocking from the stockroom freezer, ignore it. Never let the pumps run after 3:03 a.m. Shut everything down, even if there are customers. I laughed nervously when I first read them, thinking it was some kind of inside joke for new employees. Carl didn't laugh. His face was stone cold, his tired eyes boring into me as he told me to follow the rules. Not just because it was company policy, but because not following them meant I wouldn't last the week. He didn't explain what he meant. The first 2 nights on the job were uneventful. I sat behind the counter, half asleep, half alert, while truckers shuffled in for coffee and snacks. The hum of the refrigerators filled the air, and the buzz of the fluorescent lights above kept me company. I noticed the place had a strange atmosphere at night, like the shadows stretched longer than they should, like the silence outside the glass doors pressed too hard against the store. Still, nothing out of the ordinary happened. It was on the third night that things began to shift. I started at 10 p.m. Carl left after giving me a nod, his face unreadable. He didn't need to remind me about the rules anymore. I'd memorized them, not because I believed in them, but because they stuck in my mind like splinters. Around midnight, a car pulled into the lot. It was an old Chevy, paint faded, headlights dim. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a gray hat. My chest tightened when I saw him. The rule flashed in my head instantly. If a man in a gray hat asks for cigarettes, do not look him in the eye. Pretend not to hear him. I told myself it was just coincidence. Lots of people wore gray hats. He walked into the store slowly, the bell above the door giving a dull chime. His boots clicked against the tile floor, echoing in the near-empty shop. He stopped in front of the counter, his hat tilted low enough that I couldn't make out his eyes. "Pack of Reds," he said, voice low, gravelly. My mouth went dry. I kept my gaze fixed on the register, my fingers drumming nervously on the counter. My instinct screamed at me to hand him the cigarettes, to make the sale and move on. But the rule repeated over and over in my head like a warning siren. Don't look at him. Pretend not to hear. So I froze. The silence between us grew heavy, suffocating. The man shifted slightly, his boots scraping against the tile. I could feel his gaze burning into me beneath the brim of that hat. "I said a pack of Reds," he repeated, slower this time. I swallowed hard, eyes still locked on the register. My heart was pounding in my ears, my hands trembling. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he let out a strange chuckle, low it growing louder, filling the entire store. It wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was the sound of someone who knew something I didn't, someone who had already decided the end of a story I hadn't even begun. Without another word, he turned and walked out, the bell above the door chiming again as he disappeared into the night. I heard his car engine start, the tires crunching against the gravel, and then he was gone. I sat there, paralyzed, the rule echoing in my head. If I had broken it, what would have happened? The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence. Every creak of the building, every hum of the refrigerator felt amplified. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., Carl walked in and gave me his usual nod. For a moment, I thought about telling him what happened, about the man in the gray hat, but something told me he already knew. The next night, I came in more cautious. I locked the door at 12:13 sharp, just like the rule said, even though a woman pulling into the lot glared at me through the glass when she found she couldn't get in. I mouthed sorry and pointed at the closed sign, though technically we were open 24/7. She shook her head and drove off. At 1 a.m., I heard it, a faint knocking sound coming from the stockroom freezer. Slow, deliberate knocks, spaced evenly apart. My stomach flipped. The rule came back instantly. If you hear knocking from the stockroom freezer, ignore it. I sat perfectly still behind the counter, my eyes fixed on the glowing numbers of the clock. The knocking continued, steady and patient, like whoever or whatever was inside knew I was listening. I tried to distract myself, cleaning the coffee station, wiping down the counters, but the sound followed me. Knock, knock, knock. Always the same rhythm, always waiting. It lasted for almost an hour before finally stopping. By then, my nerves were frayed. I wanted to run outside, get in my car, and never come back. But I didn't. I needed the job. At 2:57 a.m., the quiet was broken by the sound of a car pulling up to the pump. I glanced at the clock, panic rising in my chest. The rule was clear: never let the pumps run after 3:03 a.m. Shut everything down, even if there are customers. The driver stepped out, a middle-aged man in a flannel jacket, yawning as he unscrewed the cap on his tank. I felt sweat bead on my forehead. The clock ticked closer to 3:03. I waited until the numbers flipped, then reached over and hit the switch, shutting everything down. The lights on the pumps went dark. The flow cut off instantly. The man cursed loudly, slamming his fist against the side of his car. "Hey!" he shouted, stomping toward the door. He rattled it, but I had already locked it. He pounded on the glass, his face red with anger. "Open the damn door! My tank isn't full!" I stood there, shaking my head, mouthing sorry again. His fury seemed endless, his fists slamming against the glass harder and harder until I was sure it would break. Then, suddenly, he stopped. His face changed. The anger drained away, replaced by something else. A blankness, his eyes unfocused, his body slumping slightly. He turned without another word, got back in his car, and drove away. The lot was empty again, silent. When my shift ended, Carl came in like usual. I wanted to ask him, to demand answers about what was happening at this place. But when I saw his face, I knew he wouldn't give me any. The rules weren't suggestions. They weren't pranks. They were survival. And for the first time since starting, I realized something I hadn't before. The rules weren't meant to protect the store. They were meant to protect me. By the fourth night, the store no longer felt like a place of work. It felt like a test, a quiet battlefield where the rules were my only armor, and I didn't yet understand who or what I was fighting against. Carl never asked me how my nights went, and I never volunteered details. He'd hand me the keys, mumble a tired, lock up at dawn, and shuffle out the door. His silence was unsettling, but maybe he knew too much. Maybe words couldn't help me anyway. That night, I made sure the coffee pot was ready. The rule had been gnawing at me ever since I first read it. Always keep the coffee pot half full, even if nobody drinks it. It seemed so ridiculous. Coffee wasn't expensive, but why waste it if nobody was buying? Still, after the man in the gray hat and the freezer knocking, I wasn't about to gamble. I brewed a fresh pot and let it sit, the bitter smell filling the store. I made sure it stayed half full, topping it off whenever it dipped lower. The minutes dragged by, and the hum of the machines around me blended into a constant drone. Sometime around 1:30 a.m., the bell above the door chimed. A man walked in. At first glance, he looked ordinary, slender, neatly dressed, maybe mid-30s. His hair was slicked back, and he wore a pair of glasses that reflected the harsh fluorescent lights. But something about him felt wrong. His steps were too measured, too deliberate, like he was walking on a stage instead of a convenience store floor. He didn't browse. He didn't grab snacks or cigarettes. He walked straight to the counter, stopping just a few feet away. His lips stretched into a wide, unnatural smile. "Is the coffee fresh?" he asked. His voice was strange, smooth but hollow, as if it came from far away. Yes, I answered automatically, though my throat was dry. Good, he said. May I? I nodded, gesturing toward the pot. My eyes flicked to it nervously. Half full, exactly like the rule said. The man poured himself a cup, steam rising as the liquid splashed into the paper cup. He stirred it with a plastic stick, though he hadn't added sugar or cream. Then slowly, he brought it to his lips. He didn't drink. He just held it there, breathing in the steam, his smile never fading. You've been following the rules, he said suddenly, turning his head slightly toward me. His glasses caught the light, hiding his eyes. That's good. Very good. My heart skipped a beat. Nobody had ever mentioned the rules before, not even the regular customers. They acted like this was just another gas stop. But this man knew. He knew. I don't know what you mean, I muttered, my voice shaking. His grin widened, stretching too far across his face. Oh, but you do. You understand more every night. The air in the store seemed to grow heavier. My skin prickled, and I could hear my own pulse in my ears. Who are you? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. He tilted his head, almost bird-like. A friend, for now. He lifted the cup to his lips again and drank deeply. I watched the liquid level fall lower and lower until the pot was nearly empty. My stomach dropped. The rule was clear. It had to stay half full. Without thinking, I grabbed the pot and rushed to brew another batch, pouring more in until the glass container rose back to the halfway mark. My hands were shaking so badly that I spilled some on the hot plate, the hiss of burning liquid filling the silence. The man's smile twitched. For a moment, his expression faltered and his lips curled downward into something darker. He set the cup down on the counter with a soft clink. You learn quickly, he said finally, the grin returning. That will keep you alive. I didn't breathe until he turned and walked out of the store, the bell above the door chiming as he vanished into the night. His car, if he even had one, wasn't in the lot. He was simply gone. I stood frozen, staring at the steaming pot of coffee. My reflection wavered on the glass surface, warped and stretched by the heat. For the first time, I felt the weight of the rules not just as instructions, but as laws of some greater black, unseen order. The rest of the night passed without incident, though I could not shake the feeling that the man's voice lingered in the store, whispering in the hum of the refrigerators and the buzz of the lights. By dawn, I was exhausted. My shift ended, but my mind wouldn't rest. I drove home along the empty Colorado highway, the rising sun painting the mountains orange and gold. But instead of relief, I felt dread. Each night seemed to peel back another layer of this place, and revealing things I wasn't sure I wanted to see. The fifth night, I came in jittery, sleep-deprived, clutching a thermos of strong coffee. Carl barely glanced at me when he left, but I noticed his hand lingered on the door frame a moment longer than usual, like he wanted to say something but thought better of it. The first few hours dragged on in silence, but I couldn't shake the thought that something new was coming. The rules weren't random. Each night, one of them tested me. I knew tonight would be no different. At 2 a.m. I heard it again, the knocking from the stockroom freezer. Slow, steady, relentless. But this time it wasn't alone. The sound of scraping joined it, like fingernails dragging against the metal door. Then faint whispers seeped through, muffled but distinct. My name, over and over. Daniel. My heart nearly stopped. I stumbled backward, knocking over a display of chips. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, the knocking sharper. The freezer door rattled violently, as though something inside was trying to break free. The rule was clear. Ignore it. But how could I ignore it when it knew my name? I pressed my back against the counter, covering my ears, rocking slightly as the sounds grew louder. Then, just as suddenly as they had started, they stopped. The silence that followed was worse, heavy, absolute. I didn't move for the rest of the night. I couldn't. When Carl came in at 6 a.m., he froze the moment he saw me. His eyes darted toward the stockroom door, then back to me. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. You kept it shut? He asked quietly. Yes, I whispered. His shoulders eased slightly, but he looked older than ever, his face drawn and pale. He gave a small nod, then walked past me into the office. That was the first time I realized something about Carl. He wasn't just my manager. He was a survivor, and I had no idea how long I could last in this place. By the sixth night, The store felt less like a gas stop and more like a living thing, watching me, breathing around me, testing how far I could bend before I broke. I had started to notice things I never paid attention to before, how the fluorescent lights would flicker in rhythm with my heartbeat, how the hum of the refrigerator sometimes dipped into tones that almost formed words, how the shadows in the aisles leaned toward me even when I stood still. I came in early, just before 10, and made sure the coffee pot was half full before Carl even left. He lingered again that night, his hand on the door, his eyes flicking toward me like he wanted to give me advice, but knew it wouldn't matter. Then he walked out into the night, leaving me in the hum of the store once again. The hours crawled. Nothing happened before midnight. A few truckers came in, tired faces, heavy boots, the smell of diesel clinging to their clothes. They bought coffee, beef jerky, and cigarettes, muttering thanks before heading back to the road. Those moments almost felt normal, almost like this job wasn't eating me alive, one rule at a time. But then 12:13 came. I locked the front door, as I always did, the key turning in the old mechanism with a loud metallic click. A small act, but it felt like placing a barrier between me and the world outside, though I wasn't sure if I was locking danger out or locking myself in with it. At 1 a.m., the knocking on the freezer began again. I froze, every muscle in my body tightening. The steady rhythm tapped through the silence, followed by faint scratching, like nails dragging down the inside of the door. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I ignored it the way the rules demanded. But that night, something new happened. As the knocking faded, I heard a different sound, a faint, sharp tap on the glass. The front window. My stomach dropped. Slowly, I turned my head. A man was standing outside, pressed against the glass, his face inches from mine. His skin was pale, almost gray, stretched too tight over sharp cheekbones. His eyes were wide, unblinking, pupils blown so large they nearly swallowed the whites. His lips were parted, but he didn't speak. He just stared. The lights above flickered, buzzing louder, and for a moment I thought I was imagining him. But when the glass fogged with his breath, I knew he was real. The door was locked. I reminded myself of that fact, clinging to it like a lifeline. He couldn't get in. Then he raised his hand, slowly, deliberately. His long fingers tapped against the glass, once, twice, 3 times. The sound echoed through the empty store. I stood frozen behind the counter, every instinct screaming at me to run, to hide, to do anything but stand there. But the rules hadn't said anything about this. There was no page in the manual about pale men at the window. He tapped again. His smile stretched wide, revealing too many teeth. "Daniel," he whispered. My heart stopped. The glass shouldn't have carried his voice that clearly, but it slid into the store as though there was no barrier between us at all. I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over the display of candy bars. My breath came in shallow gasps, my chest aching with each one. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The man tilted his head, pressing his palm flat against the glass. His skin was so pale it looked almost translucent, the blue veins underneath glowing faintly in the fluorescent light. He dragged his hand slowly down, leaving a smear of condensation in its path. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. I blinked, and the space outside the window was empty. The lot was silent, no footsteps, no car, nothing, just the glow of the pump standing idle in the dark. The silence that followed was suffocating. I didn't move for the rest of the night. Every sound made me jump, the creak of the shelves, the pop of the refrigerator compressors, the distant hum of traffic on the highway. But nothing else happened. When Carl walked in at dawn, I was still standing in the same spot, shaking, my eyes fixed on the window. "You saw him, didn't you?" he asked, his voice flat, as though he already knew the answer. I didn't respond. Carl sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "Don't talk to him. Don't open the door. No matter what he says, he's not what he looks like." My voice cracked as I whispered, "Who is he?" Carl didn't answer. He just gave me a long, heavy look before heading into the back office. I went home after that, but sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale face pressed against the glass, those wide black eyes drilling into me. I told myself I'd quit, that I'd call Carl and tell him I couldn't do another night. But when the evening came, I found myself driving back to the gas stop, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. I wasn't sure if I wanted answers anymore. I just wanted to survive. But deep down, I was starting to realize something terrifying. The rules weren't just to keep me alive. They were to keep them out. And I was beginning to suspect that not all of them were staying outside anymore. By the seventh night, I'd stopped pretending that this was just a job. It wasn't. A normal job didn't have manuals filled with strange rules, pale men whispering your name through glass, or freezers that knocked back when you walked by. No, this was something else entirely. This was survival, and every shift felt like a coin toss between living until dawn or vanishing into whatever waited beyond those rules. When I arrived at the store that night, Carl was waiting for me out front. That had never happened before. He stood by the pumps, his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, staring at the highway like he was expecting someone or something to come. "You're holding up better than most," he said when I walked up. His voice was low, almost drowned out by the rumble of a passing truck. "Most?" I asked. He glanced at me, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. "You're not the first one I've hired." Before I could ask anything else, he shoved the keys into my hand and walked off without another word. Inside, the store felt colder than usual. The coffee pot was half full, the freezers hummed, the lights buzzed overhead, but the silence pressed harder than ever. It wasn't the silence of an empty store. It was the silence of something waiting. Midnight came and went without incident. I locked the doors at 12:13, watching the lot outside stretch empty beneath the neon glow. For a moment, I let myself believe it would be an easy night. But then, just before 3 a.m., a pair of headlights cut across the lot. A truck pulled up to the pumps, an old rig, paint chipped, engine coughing. The driver climbed out, his figure a dark silhouette against the glare of the lights. He wore a heavy jacket, the hood pulled low over his face. My stomach tightened. I glanced at the clock, 2:59. The rule hit me like ice water. Never let the pumps run after 3:03 a.m. Shut everything down, even if there are customers. The man swiped his card, the pump clicking as it came to life. Gas began to flow, the numbers on the screen ticking upward. I stared at the clock, every second a hammer against my chest. 3:01. 3:02. The man leaned against his truck, his hood still hiding his face. I could feel his eyes on me through the glass. My hand hovered over the switch, sweat dripping down my temple. Then the numbers flipped. 3:03. I slammed the switch down. The pumps died instantly, lights flickering off. The man's head snapped toward me. His hood slipped just enough for me to see his face. Or what should have been his face. There was nothing there. Just smooth, pale skin stretched tight where features should have been. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. My breath caught in my throat as he tilted his head unnaturally, like a puppet with its strings pulled too hard. Then he started walking toward the store. I stumbled backward, heart pounding as his hands pressed against the glass door. He pushed, pulled, rattled the frame violently, though the lock held firm. When that didn't work, he pressed his smooth, blank face against the glass. His skin left a greasy smear as he dragged it slowly downward, the sound sharp and wet. My legs nearly gave out beneath me. Then, without warning, he stepped back. He stood still in the lot, head cocked toward the sky. A moment later, he climbed into his truck. The engine coughed to life, the headlights cut across the lot, and he drove away into the darkness. The pumps sat dead silent, their lights still dark. The lot was empty again, but I couldn't shake the image of that faceless man, his skin pressed against the glass like he was trying to push through it. The rest of the shift crawled by. Every creak of the building sounded like footsteps. Every flicker of the lights made me flinch. I didn't even breathe until the sky began to pale with dawn. When Carl came in, I was already waiting at the counter, pale and shaking. "I saw someone last night," I told him, my voice hoarse. Or something. He froze in the doorway. His shoulders sagged as though he'd been carrying a weight for too long. "You shut the pumps off on time?" he asked. "Yes," I whispered. He nodded slowly, then said, "Then you're still here." I stared at him, my mind spinning. What happens if I don't? For a moment he didn't answer. He just looked at me with those tired eyes, the lines on his face deeper than ever. Finally, he said, "Then they don't leave." That was all he gave me before walking into the back office, leaving me alone with the silence. I drove home that morning with shaking hands on the wheel. The sunrise didn't feel like relief anymore. It felt like a reprieve, temporary and fragile. And for the first time since I started, I wondered if maybe I wouldn't make it to the end of the week. By the eighth night, the gas stop didn't even feel like part of the world anymore. The highway outside stretched into the darkness like a vein, carrying the occasional truck or car. But once those headlights disappeared, I felt utterly cut off. The store was an island, and I was stranded on it, surrounded by rules that kept me alive without telling me why. I came in just before 10. Carl was waiting behind the counter this time, instead of out front. He looked worse than usual, eyes bloodshot, skin pale, hands trembling as he counted the drawer. He didn't even greet me, just shoved the keys across the counter and muttered, "Stay away from the stockroom tonight." That was all. No explanation. Just that single warning. I should have pressed him, should have demanded answers, but the look on his face told me I didn't want them. The first hours were quiet, too quiet. I made sure the coffee pot stayed half full. I checked the locks at 12:13 sharp. When the freezer started knocking at 1, I ignored it, even as it grew harder, sharper, like something was pounding to get out. But then, at 2 a.m., I heard it. The sound came not from the freezer, but from the stockroom door itself. A slow creak, like the hinges straining. Then a soft click, as though the knob had turned just slightly on its own. I froze, my hand tightening on the counter. The rule book had said nothing about the door itself opening, only the freezer. I stepped closer, heart hammering. The door stood at the far end of the aisle, a plain white panel with a metal knob. But as I stared, I saw it shudder. Just slightly, like something on the other side was pressing against it. Then came the whispers. Not muffled this time, clear. Dozens of voices, layered over each other, calling my name. "Daniel! Daniel! Daniel!" My legs turned to stone. The voices were urgent, pleading, almost desperate. "Let us out! Just for a moment, just to breathe." I stumbled back, knocking over a rack of candy bars. My breath came in ragged gasps, my throat burning as though the air itself had turned sharp. The knob rattled, hard, once, twice, then again. The door shuddered violently in its frame, each impact sending a shock through the walls. I ran to the counter, fumbling for the phone. I dialed Carl's number with shaking hands. He answered on the first ring. "Don't touch the door," he said immediately, his voice harsh, panicked. "It's opening," I whispered, eyes locked on the stockroom as the knob turned another fraction. "Something's trying to get out." "Then let it try," Carl said. "Just don't help it. Don't open that door no matter what you hear." The line went dead. I dropped the phone, my chest heaving. The door rattled again, the whispers growing louder, clearer, like they were right in my ear. "Please, just a crack. We can't breathe in here." I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices crawled into my head, wrapping around my thoughts, twisting them. For one terrifying moment, I almost believed them. I almost reached for the knob. Then the clock on the wall chimed 3 a.m. The cheap plastic hands ticking forward with a hollow click. And just like that, the voices stopped. The knob stilled. The door went silent. I stood there, drenched in sweat, trembling so hard my knees nearly gave out. The rest of the night passed in heavy silence, the kind that pressed down on your lungs, making it hard to breathe. When Carl walked in at dawn, I was still at the counter, pale and shaking. He looked at me, then at the stockroom door. "You didn't open it," he said quietly. "No," I whispered. "Good," he muttered. "If you had, we wouldn't be having this conversation." I wanted to scream at him, to demand he tell me what was behind that door, what was in the freezer, what any of this was about. But I didn't. The words stuck in my throat, heavy and useless. Carl turned to leave, then paused. He looked at me with those tired eyes, the kind that had seen too much. "You've lasted longer than most," he said. "But tomorrow night is different. Tomorrow night is the test. If you can make it through that, you'll understand." Then he walked out, leaving me alone with those words echoing in my head. The test. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew one thing for certain. If the past nights were preparation, then whatever came next would be worse. Much worse. By the time the first hints of dawn began bleeding into the night sky, I felt like I had lived 100 lifetimes. My eyes were burning, my body trembling with exhaustion, but sleep wasn't even an option anymore. The rules had been followed, broken, bent, and rewritten in ways I didn't even know possible. And through it all, the gas stop stood exactly as it always had, quiet, small, unassuming. From the outside, It looked like nothing more than a tired pit stop on Colorado Highway, but I knew better now. The rules weren't about keeping customers happy or about keeping the gas stop in business. They weren't about safety or efficiency. They were about survival. Mine, yours, anyone foolish enough to take a shift here. As the light crept closer, I realized I hadn't seen my replacement arrive. The clock ticked past 6, then 6:30. No headlights appeared, no familiar car pulling up. That's when it hit me. Maybe there was no replacement. Maybe there never had been. Maybe once you agreed to work the night shift here, you never really left. I paced behind the counter, trying to keep myself from collapsing under the weight of that thought. The radio crackled once more. "Stay awake," it whispered. "You'll understand soon." The words chilled me more than the coldest night wind. Stay awake? Why? What happened if I didn't? My body screamed for rest, but fear chained my eyelids open. The shadows in the aisle shifted again, but this time they didn't retreat. They gathered. Shapes forming into figures, some tall, some crouched, some broken and bent in ways that defied anatomy, and all of them staring directly at me. One stepped forward, its face an empty blur, its body quivering like smoke, trying to hold itself together. It lifted a hand, long fingers curling toward me, and for a moment I thought it was going to attack. Instead, it pointed toward the rule sheet pinned to the wall behind me. The paper was different now. The neat handwriting I'd read that first night had changed. New lines had appeared, scrawled in frantic strokes. Rule 10. The moment you stop believing, they will take you. Rule 11. This job is yours forever. I spun back around, heart hammering, but the figures were gone. The aisles were empty again, the hum of the lights steady, as if nothing had happened. But the rules were still there, still changed, and that was when I finally understood. This wasn't just a job. It wasn't even a curse. It was a trap. The gas stop had chosen me, maybe the moment I walked through those glass doors, maybe even earlier. Maybe it had been waiting. I laughed, the sound broken and ugly in the silence, the kind of laugh that comes when you know there's no escape, no choice left to make. The sun broke over the horizon, filling the store with a soft golden glow. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd survived long enough to see freedom. But the door never unlocked. The morning never truly arrived. It was still night inside, no matter what the outside world showed. And the rules, those damned impossible rules, kept staring back at me from the wall. I knew then I would never leave this place. Not really. The gas stop wasn't just on Colorado Highway. It wasn't even on a map. It was somewhere else, something else, and I was its newest keeper. So, if you ever find yourself pulling off the highway in the middle of the night, if you see the neon glow of a 7-Eleven standing lonely under the stars, I have only one piece of advice. Keep driving, because once you walk through those doors, the rules become yours, and you don't get to break them. Thank you for spending your night with Dr. Snooze. Every comment, like, and share keeps this channel alive and growing, just like the stories themselves. If you enjoyed this tale, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next part, because the darkness has only just begun. Until then, sleep tight, if you can.